Feeding the homeless in public in Fort Lauderdale. Is it a crime or an act of compassion?
Food for thought. The city's top lawmaker and the accused lawbreaker are both here with us right now.
We know the winners and losers from Tuesday's election, but do we know why they won or lost, and what does it mean in the future? We will ask our Powerhouse Roundtable.
Good morning and welcome. We begin today with an issue in so many neighborhoods among people struggling, living on the streets, and those working to help and feed them.
This week in Fort Lauderdale, those Good Samaritans ran afoul of a new city ordinance, or a set of ordinances, that ban outdoor feeding, and our cameras and Bob Norman were there for the results.
It shouldn't be a crime. It shouldn't be illegal to feed the homeless.
25-year-old Nikki Rice said she was willing to be arrested for feeding the homeless. You're prepared to be charged with the crime today?
Yes.
Nikki, come on.
Soon after our interview, that's exactly what happened. Roy and two others were handcuffed and apparently taken to jail after they violated the city's new ordinance that virtually outlaws feeding the homeless in public.
Food is a right, not a privilege.
Stand right over here.
The youngest of the three, Damian Gabriel, is just 17.
I am ashamed to live in the city of Fort Lauderdale. I'm ashamed that these people are touching me. I'm disgusted.
The arrest of 90-year-old humanitarian Arnold Abbott has made international headlines, including a send-up on Comedy Central's Colbert Report.
Clearly he knows what Jesus said in Matthew, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and look out, the cops are here. Hide the loaves and the fishes."
Well, joining us this morning is the gentleman you see there, Fort Lauderdale Mayor Jack Seiler, who supports his city's ordinance as necessary for public health and safety.
And Arnold Abbott, who, with his foundation called Love Thy Neighbor, has been sharing food for the last 2 decades, but this week is facing fines, possibly jail time for that charity work.
And also with us, we are glad to welcome our friend and colleague, Local 10's Bob Norman, who covered the story all week long and, as you saw, was there for the arrest. Well,
Good
gentlemen,
morning.
great to see you all.
Thank you
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Mayor Seiler, what is wrong with what Mr. Abbott has been doing lately and for the last almost 23 years?
Well, first of all, let's make it clear. We are not banning feeding in the city of Fort Lauderdale. We haven't banned feeding the homeless in the city of Fort Lauderdale. And what Arnold is doing is actually a very kind, compassionate act. We're just simply asking him to do it in a proper location. He is an individual with a big heart, and we encourage him to continue to serve the homeless, but there are right ways to do it and there are wrong ways to do it. We're simply asking that he does it in the right location, and there are dozens proper locations in the city of Fort Lauderdale to do these feedings for the homeless. And in addition, there are dozens of feeders on a regular basis that do it in compliance and don't make the press. So I commend Arnold for what he's doing. I think he's, like I said, a very kind, compassionate individual. We just ask that he does it in such a way that we can all do it better for the city of Fort Lauderdale.
Mr. Abbott, what are you doing that is not in compliance? Do you have a dispute with that?
Well, my dispute is primarily with the mayor of Fort Lauderdale, because these dozens and dozens of locations I am not aware of. I don't know where they exist, because we have tried many, many times to find indoor locations to feed the homeless, and they have not been available to us. So if you can find locations like that, I am not married to Stranahan Park. I am very happy to go elsewhere. This afternoon I've been offered a driveway and a parking lot at a beautiful small African American church, which I plan to take advantage of. But I would be delighted if you could give me those locations to places who are willing to take us in.
No, that's wonderful news, because that's exactly what we've been saying. The ordinance that we passed actually expanded the number of locations where you can feed the homeless. Every house of worship in the city of Fort Lauderdale is now on limits, if you will. This ordinance was done with the assistance of the faith-based groups, the houses of worship. We're working with some 70 churches, some 20-plus organizations. They're all feeding on a regular and daily basis and not running afoul of the city law. So, Arnold, I'm delighted to hear that. That's probably the best news I've heard all week, and I look forward to working with you and these churches that have indicated to me they would love to host your feedings. So
Can we broaden this out just a bit? I know, Bob, you've reported on so much. The city has instituted 5 or 6 ordinances just in the last few months against things like panhandling, sleeping on the streets, all directed at homeless issues. Why now? What is that in response to?
Well, as you know, I'm mayor of Fort Lauderdale, and I'm mayor of everybody in Fort Lauderdale, and that includes the families, the businesses, the residents, the visitors, the tourists, and the homeless. And as mayor, I have to balance the interests of everybody. And so we've been trying to balance the interest of working with the homeless. We have done more at the city of Fort Lauderdale than any other city in Broward as a comprehensive approach to the homeless. I have an editorial this morning in the Sun Sentinel laying it out. So we've done more for the homeless than any city in Broward County, and we're looking at doing it comprehensively. But as part of that, we've got to balance the interests. And as, for example, Stranahan Park, which I'm, again, delighted to hear he's willing to move away from there, that park had essentially been shut down to the public. It essentially, the women's club in that park had come to me and said, we can't host activities here, we can't host events here, we have issues with urination.
Because of the feedings?
Because of the feedings and the homeless hanging out in that park waiting for the feedings. Public urination, public defecation, then using that park to interfere with traffic at Broward and Andrews, where everybody knows, you know, cars and pedestrians don't mix.
Right.
And where we don't have a median there, you can't have pedestrians in the middle of that street in downtown Fort Lauderdale.
Arnold, what is unreasonable about the ordinances that Fort Lauderdale has passed? I mean, what part of them do you think just don't work?
Well, I personally do not understand why I was given a citation on Wednesday last, because number one, the proviso that says you have to have a porta potty at every feeding, I feed adjacent to the only public restroom in Fort Lauderdale, so that part is moot. Also, as far as sanitation, I teach sanitation to homeless individuals. We have the Love Thy Neighbor Culinary Skills Training Program. They are well versed in sanitation. We spend 9 weeks teaching sanitation. Every single part of serving food in a sanitary manner is done by Love Thy Neighbor. You have a rule that says you have to have a bucket of hot soapy water. We utilize hot soapy water before every feeding. We use a single-use paper towel, discard it, and then put on gloves. So everything done sanitarily is done by Love Thy Neighbor. And I don't understand why I was cited on Wednesday, except for the fact that I didn't have a permit. And as you well know, when we sued the city 15 years ago and asked for a permit, a year and a half later they said we don't have any mechanism for granting permits to anybody. So we did not expect the permit. All else was done according to law. When they wrote up the citation, they said I refuse to stop feeding. The truth is nobody asked me to stop feeding. I was amazed to see that they allowed us to feed everybody. When they didn't on the Sunday before, they stopped us after I had fed 3 people. And a little wording that's been used around the world, a policeman came up to me and said, drop that plate, drop it immediately. That's all, I was holding a weapon. And that was the end of that. They stopped me from feeding, and I did find out that this beautiful black church allowed us to go and feed in their driveway, and I took the group over and we managed to feed them.
All right. It sounds to me like you're saying, although you think you were treated badly in the last week a couple of times, or unreasonably, that in the future, it sounds like you're going to comply with these ordinances, are you?
Well, as far as the beach, we feed at a place where there is a public restroom, so that's not a question. However, any other feeding groups will be faced by that same problem of bringing a porta potty to each of their feedings, which I think is impossible.
Exactly.
I think it's ludicrous because I believe it's the duty of the city to provide public restrooms, not the duty of a feeding group.
Right. The idea that this is about sanitation is laughable. If the city really cared about sanitation for the homeless, they would provide the restrooms and they would provide the rinsing stations. Why doesn't the city provide public facilities for the homeless, Mayor?
There are public facilities for the homeless at City Hall. There are public facilities around. The specific issue
Where?
with public urination and public defecation, it's why we're saying arrangements need to be made. When you're dealing with quality of life issues, again, this is not my choice to go after Mr. Abbott. It's not my choice to go
Whose
after
choice is
any
it?
I'd appreciate no interruptions if that's all right, if I can just finish
Go
my
ahead.
thoughts.
Go ahead, Jack.
It's not my choice to go after Mr. Abbott or my choice to do anything more than enforce the laws as the mayor of Fort Lauderdale, the laws that are set up for the public health, safety, and welfare of all, including the homeless. So we had an ordinance that we worked with the homeless advocates on, we worked with the faith-based groups on, we worked with all the homeless organizations in Broward County. We came up with a solution that we think works. Everybody else complies with that solution that we think works. And I'm delighted to hear today that Arnold's wants to comply. And listen, this is good news for us as a city because we're not looking for any tension. I think, like I said, if he can continue to feed, that's wonderful. That helps those in the community that are most vulnerable, most needy. And I think together with cooperation, we can do some great things. And so I'm excited about that, Arnold. And I, again, thank you for reaching out.
You know, this is a very good place to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to continue this discussion about, is this the criminalization of homelessness? And we'll talk all about that when we come right back. Stay with us.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Live this morning in our studio are Arnold Abbott of Love Thy Neighbor, who has been feeding the homeless in Fort Lauderdale for 23 years, and Mayor Jack Seiler, the mayor of Fort Lauderdale, our colleague Bob. And Arnold, let me ask you. You just said during the break you're not going to stop feeding on Fort Lauderdale Beach.
No, sir.
And Mayor Seiler told me before the show began here, before this conversation began, that you believe that there is a church, you were told, on the beach that is willing to offer its a space for this?
Correct. I mean, we're, as you know, the city, as I said, works with 20-some organizations and 70 churches. We work very closely with Hope South Florida, who Arnold knows very well, and they're kind of taking a leadership role on feeding the homeless and working with the homeless. And I think they'd be delighted to have Arnold as part of that network because he does such good work. But Hope South Florida has indicated that there are churches that would host these feedings and be able to allow these feedings to go forward, which I think, again, accomplishes both our missions. We want to make sure we provide for the homeless. We want to make sure we provide for the sustenance of the homeless, but we have to do it in such a way that there's a balance in the community. And at the end of the day, I think that's the better route to take, because if we're able to have a balanced feeding program where we can actually interact. A good example is this coming Tuesday's Veterans Day. You know, Fort Lauderdale has the most progressive program in the country on working with the homeless veterans with our Mission United program. We're out front on that, and so we want to be able to interview these veterans, be able to assist these veterans, and get them to the comprehensive assistance they need.
You know,
but
Jack,
we have to interact with them.
You and the city of Fort Lauderdale, I think, have been progressive and constructive in so many of these areas, but because of this, what has blown up here in the last week, you have been demonized and vilified and ridiculed, and I have to say, and I've known you for a long time, you're a very reasonable guy, but I don't think that you and the city got out in front of this and kind of told the public in general about what was coming. Because the next time we saw it, we see, Arnold Abbott, getting a couple of tickets and being threatened with jail time.
Yeah, the optics of this are just horrendous.
No, you're absolutely right. We should have done a much better job. When we rolled these ordinances out and this comprehensive approach to the homeless, we probably should have done the op-eds then. We probably should have done all the releases then. But the thought was, we need to get this system in place. All the homeless experts and advocates, Miami-Dade County's one of the leading voices, Ron Book, they've all come and said, hey, Fort Lauderdale's doing it right. Fort Lauderdale's taking the right approach to this issue, and they're moving forward on a comprehensive homeless approach. We're doing, like I said, with the veterans, unbelievable work. But we were wrong in not getting the word out sooner, not educating the public sooner, informing the public. And in fairness to Arnold, we probably should have sat down with him, realizing that he's not part of the Hope South Florida network, and and see what we could have done with him in advance of this issue, in terms of the right location for his feedings, in terms of making sure that he was on board with the proposals we're trying to do, because we have the same goal, we have the same objectives, but obviously our message got lost, and for that we apologize.
Well, this isn't a PR problem. This is a problem with the law. Mayor Seiler loves to talk about how all of the homeless advocates love what he's doing. It's not true. The National Coalition for the Homeless, which may be the biggest organization that advocates for the homeless, is saying this is the wrong thing to do.
How does
It's
this-
not the way to do it.
How does this play in with Miami's Pottinger Agreement, which essentially sets the rules
That's
for
very
how...
interesting that you bring that up, because in Miami you have to have the city is required to provide bathrooms for people. It's a
Yes.
basic human right. In Fort
Right.
Lauderdale,
Life-sustaining
not so.
activities they have to provide for. How
Well,
does
if
this
there's
play in with that?
Arnold, if there's a lawsuit, will that be part of a lawsuit? I mean, you told me that you are contemplating a lawsuit to fight the tickets and to fight these ordinances.
Well, we feel that the lawsuit that we brought about against the city 15 years ago is still in effect. We believe that the judge ruled that the city should take the least restrictive means to stop our feedings and to offer an alternate site that would be acceptable and would be available for all the homeless to get there. That's part of it. The second part is, if you've ever been to one of our beach feeding, you will realize that it's a beautiful thing to watch, because we can feed 200 people in about 45 minutes. It is the most gorgeous place for them to take their plates and sit on the benches right by the beach and enjoy the same comforts that anybody else wants to when they come to enjoy a day at the beach. So we feel very strongly that that's important. The second thing is that our feeding on the beach accrues to the benefit of the city of Fort Lauderdale.
How so?
Because tourists come by, many tourists come by, and they say to us, good, this is wonderful. They don't do this where we come from. And many of them have asked if they could participate by helping feed the homeless. And of course, we put gloves on them and we allow them to do it.
Yeah, but excuse me just a minute, Jack. I'm sure that you've had tourists as well as residents of Fort Lauderdale who have said, these people are driving me away from the beach or the parks or other spaces.
Absolutely. As I said, as mayor, again, we don't get any joy out of enforcing the laws against any one individual. But as mayor, we have to enforce the laws for the benefit of all, and that includes the tourists who have come to us and said, look, we're not coming back until this area is different. Now, I just want to comment on one thing that was said about who supports this. We've been working with Broward County. We've been working with the Broward Partnership of the Homeless, the Housing Authority of the City of Fort Lauderdale, the Salvation Army, the United Way, Hope South Florida, and the Task Force for Ending Homelessness on this issue. So this isn't the City of Fort Lauderdale out here on a limb. This is the City of Fort Lauderdale with some great community partners trying to come up with a comprehensive solution.
Does this week's event change
speak to
anything
that?
Yes.
going forward, tactics going forward?
Well, I think the number one thing it changes is, as I said, I'm obviously sitting here with Arnold. I'm delighted to hear that he wants to work with the city. We want to work with him. We think there's a solution here to be able to have the impact of his feedings and do so in a way that doesn't attract any adverse publicity or negative attention. So that, first of all, was probably the most enjoyable thing about this morning. I want to just comment on that. Secondly, going forward, we need to do a better job of informing the public. I'm working at the Homeless Assistance Center the first week of December, on some campaigns to help them. We're doing some fundraising for them with the Breakfast for the Champions. And I think they understand now that we maybe even need to increase what we're already doing there. We expanded the benefits there, the programs there, the number of beds
That's
there,
great.
but maybe we need to do more at that
Well,
Homeless
how many
Assistance
beds
Center.
does the homeless
Hold
assistance
on,
center
Bob.
have?
I'm sorry. It's a very good question, and we will try to answer it. Maybe out in the newsroom, you can ask the mayor that question. We are out of time. Jack Sadler, great to have you come in.
Great
Arnold,
discussion.
great to meet you. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
in. Bob, thank you for your input.
And coming up next, time for some Monday morning quarterbacking. Election night served up some fascinating lessons, and today's Powerhouse Roundtable takes on what we learned and where we're going.
The big news of this past week was, of course, the election. Republicans mostly won and Democrats mostly lost.
And South Florida voters mostly stayed home. Let's get right to it with our Powerhouse Roundtable. Anthony Mann is a regular here now. He's the political writer and columnist for the Sun Sentinel. At the Miami Herald, Mark Caputo, their lead reporter on politics, also writes a weekly column. You know him from the Roundtable well. And we also welcome back Nancy Ankrum, editorial page editor of the Miami Herald. Living and breathing this week, the election. Everyone recovered? Sort of?
Finally off my knees.
Election hangover, but I think that it does bear a good close inspection. And Mark, let me begin with you. 48, what was Rick Scott's final percentage 48.9, I believe, something like that. Anyway, the fact is, he didn't get a mandate. He didn't get a majority of the votes, but he won.
Well, in this election environment, if you win, you got a mandate. I think. I mean, he ran a very good campaign, and he had a tough opponent. Albeit both Rick Scott and Charlie Crist were flawed. But nevertheless, his 1.1 percentage point victory is slightly lower than the 1.2 he scored in 2010.
Right.
But Rick Scott is going to do what he's going to do, and he won, and winner take all.
Yeah, Tony Mann, I saw your column the day after the election about what it meant and why Scott won. Let me ask you why Charlie Crist lost.
Well, I think there were several reasons. The biggest factor, I think it was a bad year for Democrats nationally, and that manifested itself here in Florida. I mean, when you have such an unpopular president in power, that really hurts. But then they couldn't do certain other things. They weren't really able to get what they needed to in terms of black voter participation. Right. The exit polls show that black voters voted maybe a little more for Governor Scott than people might have expected. I think the Chain Gang Charlie hurt in the African American community. That was still alive. Turnout was not what it should have been in Democratic areas.
And
Dade was awful, Broward was awful.
We saw that first Sunday, what was supposed to be the big Sunday Souls to the Polls push. That first Sunday of early voting was not a good turnout. And then, of course, the second Sunday, right before the election, Nancy, turnout was better, but there was no big starring role for anybody that Sunday.
The Democrats did what the Democrats do in a midterm election, which is stay home and sit it out. And we saw the results in 2010, and we see the results now.
I had said that I didn't think that Charlie Crist was the greatest candidate. He was a flawed candidate. But then again, the Democratic Party has no bench. He was what they had. But at a certain point, when you have 5 midterm elections losses in a row for the Florida Democrats, and in each case Democrats have stayed home, you have to wonder at what point the problem is Democratic voters in addition to their candidates themselves.
Well, I saw Annette Taddeo this week was saying, Charlie Crist running mate, the lieutenant governor, was saying she thought the last minute influx of $13 million that Rick Scott put into his campaign, all on the air, she sort of alluded to, we just couldn't overcome that. That's what the nail in the coffin. But they had a huge get out the vote ground game. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Look, I think that Charlie Crist still had a problem resonating as a true Democrat. And he had difficulty really addressing the issues. We had an op-ed today by Mike Abrams, former state legislator, who said basically, the Democrats lost this election the minute they made Charlie Crist their candidate. That the Democratic Party was not his first choice, not his second choice. It was his third choice of party.
And you have to ask why.
But I think just about any other candidate the Democrats could have drummed up would have done even worse. Charlie Crist was as good as they could get. And back onto that advertising, I think by the end of the campaign, that last minute influx of extra millions was just icing on the cake. I think it was baked in already, to continue that metaphor, and it wasn't the decisive factor.
I saw a figure in the St. Pete Times this morning, Tampa Bay Times they call it now, that total advertising on television by all the campaigns was $104 million. And I mean, this is a staggering amount of money, and I'm sure the managers of Channel 10 and every other TV station in the state are delighted about it. But
think of what that could do for education, the environment.
But it's a staggering amount of money, but it's a staggeringly large and diverse state.
Yes.
And so the message that works in South Florida is not going to work necessarily on the I-4 corridor.
Right.
Can I tell you the most surreal moment of Tuesday? Tony and I were in Bonita Springs covering the Rick Scott campaign. How bizarre was it when the AP called the race? We had a governor. I was in front of a camera reporting we had a re-elected governor. That huge crowd had no idea. Without Charlie Crist's phone call, Rick Scott wouldn't come out. They refused to acknowledge that the race was over. That was the most surreal moment, wasn't it?
That was a strange period over there. The other strange period was when, in effect, the Crist campaign signaled for the world that they knew they were losing when they put out that email at 6:33 p.m. that they wanted a judge to extend voting hours in Broward County.
That was pathetic.
that
Yeah,
meant
sad.
we've lost.
It
Right,
was
exactly.
it was sad. Well,
Right.
let's talk about, in my view, one of the winners in this campaign really was Carlos Lopez Quintero, the running mate for Rick Scott. I think he made a difference, and a very positive difference, not just because he speaks Spanish, but he is a capable guy. And I thought, as campaigns go, I thought he was good. And what did you think, Mark?
Oh, I agree. I think that Lopez Quintero was one of the best choices for Rick Scott to be lieutenant governor from a nuts and bolts standpoint of of governing, but also from campaigning as well. That's something I didn't expect, how
I
good
didn't
Carlos
either.
would be on the
Yeah.
campaign trail. However, we do have to wrap both Carlos Lopez Quintero and Annette Taddeo. They're both from Miami-Dade County. Miami-Dade County had the worst turnout rate in the entire state. So, continuing my metaphor of what's wrong with Florida Democrats, what's wrong with Miami-Dade County voters? I mean, what's it take for people to show
40
up?
point something percent. It's just awful.
It really is.
We're number one again.
In
a bad way.
Dubious distinction for Miami-Dade. And you really have to wonder at a certain point why folks aren't interested in going out and voting in a governor's race when the two lieutenant governors, the two running mates, are both from the county.
Why, or answer that. Why? Why?
You know, I think it's a matter of, is it the chicken or is it the egg? You know, you ask, what does it take for the voters to get out? Well, what does it take for a candidate who has the qualities to bring the voters out?
And we've done, all of us here did such a get out the vote effort on our respective news
Absolutely.
outlets. Where was everybody?
They're watching
Were they
Dancing with the Stars, I would imagine.
That's on our stations.
The people that watch this program and read our newspapers, they go out and
voted.
vote.
They- exactly.
Our constituency, they are voters. We know that, and we hear
Yeah.
from them. And God bless you, and thank you very much. Let me ask you, on election night, you were in Bonita Springs. I was simply watching the governor. He said, we are on a mission. And I guess the mission is to grow the economy, put people to work. Is that it? Is that the agenda for the next 4 years?
The thing is, we don't really know what Rick Scott's mission is because he didn't tell us in the campaign. He talked a lot about jobs and talked about what
The
he
American
said was his
dream
record.
and,
but we don't really know how he's going to govern. Are we going to go back to the Tea Party guy from shortly after he was elected,
I don't
or the
think
more
so.
moderate guy that ran for re-election?
It's going to be a very conservative period in Florida. Think about it as that Rick Scott's going to be able to appoint, I think, 3 justices to the Florida Supreme Court. That can adjust the balance of power after roughly 20 years, or it will be more than 20 years, that Democrats will be out of power. The Republican stamp will be on the Florida House, the Florida Senate, the Florida Governor's Mansion, the Florida Cabinet, and on the Florida Supreme Court.
Even without Amendment 3.
Yeah,
Right, and the
goodbye, Florida Democratic Party, if you don't find a way to throw a Hail Mary pass.
And the legislature is going to be really leading the way. We met with just about everyone running for the state legislature, and yes, that conservative agenda, we're going to be seeing charter schools, we're going to see
Vouchers.
vouchers, we're going to be seeing prisons, privatization of a lot of the services.
Well, to Michael's point about a mandate, all through the last months of the election, we had an influx of money in the budget for education and the environment, and Rick Scott was now the education governor and the environment governor.
environmental
Does
governor.
that go away?
It doesn't have to stick around.
Well, and on that point, Amendment 1 on the ballot, the land and conservation, water conservation issue, 75% of voters said yes.
Right.
But now it's up to the legislature to enable it, to make it work. And who knows what they're going to do?
Well, the Republican legislative candidates that the editorial board talked to were all very skeptical about Amendment 1. They said it really ties our hands in terms of how we can distribute money, and that was the point.
That was the point, exactly.
Exactly, because funds had been set up in trusts in other places for Florida Forever and all these things, and the lawmakers kept dipping in
rating it,
and rating those funds.
Shall we take a quick break? And what you won't see in the next couple of minutes are any more of those negative ads. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back. And welcome back to the fun. Quick reintroductions. We have Tony Mann from the Sun-Sentinel. We have Nancy Ankrum, editorial board of the Miami Herald. Mark Caputo, chief political guy at the Miami Herald, hashing over elections. Amendment 2, the medical marijuana. All eyes on that amendment that we knew it would go down at the end. The poll showed that it would not reach 60%.
Yeah, the poll was exactly right.
Yeah, it was
about.
right.
They
Yeah,
said 57, 58%, and
what
that's
now?
exactly what it was.
Oh, you had to go there.
Snuffed.
Here we go. Buckle up.
Smoke. Yes.
As I like to quote, excuse me, close but no doobie.
No.
I mean, almost 58% is still a pretty good number. And John Morgan, the Orlando trial lawyer who helped fund this effort, says he's going to come back with something. He kind of threatened the legislature and Republicans, saying, look, if you don't do this, I'm going to bring it back in a presidential election year and then look out. One thing that I'd say to John Morgan is like, well, Amendment 2 got 500,000 more votes than Rick Scott, who opposed it, but it also got 600,000 more votes than Charlie Crist, who supported it. So there's a divorce in the minds of voters between a candidate who supports and opposes medical marijuana and their support for it.
Right, and 58% is awfully close to the 60% that it needed. So that's close, but no spliff or anything like that. But
doesn't it belong in the statutes? Isn't that where it should go?
Well, I mean, a lot of what we put in the Florida Constitution doesn't belong in the Florida Constitution, but that's the system that we have. I don't know that you want California where everything can get added to the statutes by referendum. The marijuana thing, I'm actually surprised it got 58% of the vote. They ran a terrible campaign to try and get people to pass it. They really ran no campaign. They had a bus going around and.
Well, it became a promotional thing for John Morgan, which was part of the problem.
Right.
In the end, it wasn't about Rebecca, the young girl who lives in Weston, who wants help. It was about John Morgan's brother, and that's laudable and understandable. But
and the antis had their stuff together.
Yes,
they did. And
they
I thought the ad with the doctor
money,
saying, you're not going to get a script, this is not really medical, I thought that was a very effective ad.
Yeah.
Which, interestingly, if they were going to try and get young voters to come to the polls and possibly help Charlie Crist as well as vote for medical marijuana, that kind of message, the anti-message that it was going to be open marijuana for everyone, that might have helped on college campuses, but the pro-marijuana people couldn't make that argument, which some people think really is the truth. So they were stuck in a bad place, but never made any effective argument.
My question is now, in the campaign, there were people who use medical marijuana, everything else be darned, because they need it and want it and feel it's effective. And now that there is no law for them in Florida, they're sort of outed. What happens to them?
That's a good question. Well, hopefully Jack Seiler's Fort Lauderdale Police Department will come around and bust people for more misdemeanors.
They're busy. They've been busy.
That's right. They're busy busting 90-year-old guys serving food to the homeless. Yeah, I guess we do live in a bit of a police state, but at a certain point, I think police departments are going to prioritize and look, I'm not going to bust a cancer patient for smoking pot.
Right. That would be bad optics.
Right.
Exactly.
All right, let's take a look, if we can, at the 26th congressional district race. Joe Garcia losing to Carlos Curbelo. Tony, you said earlier that there was a Republican wave, or at least a tide was running in favor of the Republicans, and I think that the 4-point difference between Curbelo and Garcia, part of that was that wave that was running and the failure of Democrats to come out.
And we saw that, in South Florida, we saw bad turnout for Democrats, and that certainly, or relatively bad turnout for Democrats, and that certainly contributed to that. There were many other factors. Clearly, Garcia was a flawed re-election candidate.
Exactly, and plus, the absentee ballot issue with his assistant as chief of staff just left a bad taste in everyone's mouth.
That was a cloud that just hovered over Joe Garcia throughout the campaign.
The media hammered Curbelo about not revealing his clients. You know what? I don't think that resonated at all. That resonates with us freedom of information type people, but not with the voters.
Well, speaking of absentee ballots, onto the mechanics of campaigning, is Carlos Curbelo, like Rick Scott more broadly, did a great job getting absentee ballots returned by Republicans, and Democrats didn't. It's almost like it's the same old story time and again. Republicans are very good at banking votes before Election Day, and Democrats not so good.
Yeah, I think that we need to do a little shout out to the elections departments of Miami-Dade and Broward. We all scream justifiably when they screw up, and they've had several elections since 2000 where they've just done an awful job. By and large, I thought that both elections departments did a good job. There was more problems in Broward, I think, because they had redrawn all the precinct lines, and some people simply went to the wrong precinct and couldn't find out where they should go.
I think the things that went wrong were more of the glitch variety than the major catastrophe variety, and there always are those kinds of things in elections. And for any three people that feel disenfranchised because a race they were supposed to vote in wasn't on the ballot, and that did happen in the Plantation Acres Improvement District in Broward County. I mean, that's terrible for those people, but by and large, it ran reasonably well.
No
but also,
lines.
we have to remember this. One of the reasons it ran well is no one came out to vote.
Yeah.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
you didn't
Low
have
turnout.
That's
people
an
coming
interesting
out.
point. What would have happened if everybody voted? Would it have gone so well?
Oh, no, there would have been longer lines. I mean, one very
Right.
small thing to think about is when you're filling out an optical scan ballot, if you're in Leon County, where I used to live in Tallahassee, they give you a little marker. It makes it faster to fill out the bubble. Here in Miami-Dade, I don't know about Broward, I don't live there, is they give you a ballpoint pen. It takes you longer to circle it.
Right.
So that stuff over time can build up. That partly happened in 2012.
All right, Nancy, I have to ask you, it was a big deal to you and Rosemary Goudreau, your counterpart at the Sun-Sentinel, and I think editorial page editors across the state, that the governor would not meet with you. And I have to say, that's just another one of those things where, to most people, they don't care.
Most people, you're right, they don't care. And I had to go a long way to assure people that the fact that we did not recommend him really was not because he did not come to see us. That was not a deal breaker. I think we have written just scores of editorials over the past 4 years taking this governor to task for really not taking on the issues that we editorially think are really important, whether it's ALF, whether it's Stand Your Ground, and and also how he did certain things.
And never answered questions of anybody in any direct fashion.
And really, his not coming to see this editorial board or the Sun-Sentinels was not a surprise.
Well,
Or any other newspaper. I mean, although you would think that in, say, Duval County, in Jacksonville, he would have gone to see the newspaper there, and other places, southeast, southwest Florida, Naples area, where he had very strong support. He refused to do it.
I think he might have met with the Naples editorial board, and perhaps the Tampa Tribune. I could be wrong on that. But one point on this is paid communications. This is the effect of it. I mean, he spent at least $70 million his side on TV ads.
Yeah.
That's how he communicates his message. He doesn't need the free media. It's the
Right.
golden rule. He has the gold rules.
But we
And he won.
needed him. All right.
Anyone?
Lady and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in
Thank
for,
you.
as
As always.
always, an excellent
Fun,
discussion.
fun, fun.
Thanks.
Yeah, it is. All right, coming up, we are number one again. South Florida counties had those people not voting this week. Majority rules next.
Despite an across-the-board, two-party, massive get-out-the-vote effort, a majority of voters in South Florida just did not make the effort.
So, with so much at stake, why did voters stay home or not bother to vote early or by absentee ballot? Janine Stanwood went looking for answers in Stanwood's neighborhood.
And the headlines are already calling this bizarre moment Fangate.
The governor's race in Florida got national coverage. There was Fangate.
The Scott campaign heard there was a fan. They didn't go out there. How old are they?
It's a little embarrassing.
But in the end, on Tuesday, Miami-Dade County had the lowest voter turnout in the state. Only about 40% of registered voters showed up.
Okay, so if there was such a big buzz this year, we wanted to find out, where was everybody on election day?
Did you guys vote?
I didn't.
I didn't.
Did you vote?
Nope.
Why didn't you vote?
Because I was working.
Why didn't you vote?
Oh, because I'm not really focused on the political.
I was honestly just too lazy to vote.
Why didn't you vote?
At that time.
A lot of decisions were made without you weighing in. There's early voting.
Yeah, I missed that too.
Maybe some people just didn't know who they could have voted for.
It turns out more people who know who Kim Kardashian is than the two people who are representing them. Do you know who this is?
No.
Question number one, who's this man?
I have no idea.
Who is this man?
I have no idea.
Well, he is now, will be soon, your new U.S. congressman.
Okay.
No.
Who is this man? Do you recognize this man?
Charlie Crist. Charlie Crist?
Do you know who that is?
That's Kim Kardashian.
Yeah, okay.
Kim.
Kim Kardashian.
All right, everybody knows who Kim Kardashian is. All right.
We vote for Kim.
You'll vote for Kim.
Okay.
Thankfully, we did meet some more civic-minded folks.
That's scary to me that they don't know what's going on and they don't care.
Question number two, who is this man?
Scott.
So far, you're scoring perfect score. Who's this man?
Curbelo.
How do you feel about Rick Scott?
Bad.
So did you vote for Charlie Crist?
Yes, I did.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Good man for voting.
Okay.
What do you say to all of your peers in Miami-Dade County who did not vote?
I say it's a doggone shame.
And for others, well, there's still always 2016. In the neighborhood, I'm Janine Stanwood for This Week in South Florida.
Now, one woman getting out the vote.
Yeah, doggone shame. I agree with that
Keep
lady.
that.
All right, still to come, my personal perspective about a ballot question that went down to defeat Tuesday, but it's not going away. We are talking about the courthouse controversy. Here is a live look from our Miami Tower Cam, and boy, it looks pretty rainy out there.
Doesn't it feel like fall today? It looks like fall, I should say. Doesn't feel like fall at all. What's going on? Jennifer Correa, Weather Authority, right here with the forecast, as if you couldn't tell what that was.
Good afternoon, Glenna and Michael. And yes, it doesn't feel like fall. It feels very sticky out there. But it's one of those fall days where we are having the clouds and the rain. No sunshine for today. Now, the rain continues to impact areas of Broward, but Broward's starting to see some drier conditions as of now. Coral Springs, Sunrise, we're quiet for now. The rain does spread all the way down into Miami-Dade. And even in Homestead, dealing with a thunderstorm, and temperatures haven't warmed up much because of the cloud cover and the rain. No advisories on the water. For today, temperatures will stay in the upper 70s due to the cloud cover. Now, rain will continue all throughout tonight, scattered showers tonight, and even to start off your Monday afternoon, the sunshine will return.
Jennifer, thank you very much. All right, before we leave you this morning, a personal perspective about why the courthouse question in Miami-Dade failed so spectacularly and why the problem still needs to be solved. No one could deny that the Miami-Dade courthouse is a wreck. Kind of glorious wreck, a building of great architectural integrity. It is Miami's first skyscraper, opened in 1928. It has seen a lot of history. It has also seen better days. It is in shameful condition, and it's shameful that Miami-Dade County let this great old building fall into such bad disrepair. It still functions, but it is full of mold, termites, water leaks, and corroded support beams. It's a sick building, dangerous to the health of the nearly 600 people who work there every day. I think voters got all that. What they didn't get is what is going to replace the courthouse. Where will it be? What will it look like? And how much will it really cost? Nobody could say, because this proposal wasn't just half-baked, it hadn't even been in the oven. The question was put on the ballot at the very last minute. There wasn't enough time to explain this situation to voters, and understandably, they turned it down. Now, we need Miami-Dade leaders to start over and do it right. Give us a well-grounded, thoughtful plan to address not only replacing the old civil courthouse, but addressing the needs of the entire judicial system in Miami-Dade County. The person to lead that effort must be Mayor Carlos Gimenez. The time for him to start right now. That is my perspective for this week. Hope you have a great Sunday. Remember, as always, stay informed, get involved.
And of course, we want to know what you think. Please do weigh in on any topic you like from today, or pick one. Email, Facebook, Twitter, all of the addresses are right here. We are very easy to find, starting right now.
And go Dolphins, keep that winning streak going.